All right, I'm going to call the regular meeting of October 21st, 2024 to order for the purposes of continuation of capital budget. And I'll begin with a land acknowledgement that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located on Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta, District 11. We recognize that we stand upon the land that carries the footsteps of many Indigenous peoples, including the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis, and the city honors the First Peoples of this land and is committed to fostering reconciliation through relationship building, knowledge gathering, and education. Thank you. So today we're here for the purpose of dealing with the 2025 capital budget flagged items. Mr. Eamon.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, Your Worship and members of Council. Again, my name is Jeremy Eamon, Chief Financial Officer. So, Administration completed all presentations of the 2025 capital budget and 10-year capital plan on day one. So today's meeting, as the Mayor mentioned, will focus on going through the flagged items that were flagged on day one. Information on the flagged items has been provided to Council and is included in the agenda package, along with 2 information requests. So from a process perspective, the council member who flagged the item can provide some opening comments, followed by questions of council. Following questions, there's opportunity for motions and debate. And if there are no motions, we'll simply move on to the next flagged item. There are 6 flagged items in total. However, number 3 regarding the new aquatics facility will be carried forward to the operating budget discussion. And due to some scheduling conflicts this morning, if we can, we'll start with number 4, the flagged item number 4 for transit. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll invite Richard Gagnon up. And the flagged item was by Councillor Kelly for number 4, Project 25010, new local transit buses. Go ahead, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. My concern on this is that part of the request for 2 new buses is a significant increase in the service level for the transit system in Fort Saskatchewan. I went back in the last few days and looked at the spring update, and it is referenced in there, but I truly read that report as an update. I didn't read that report this spring as approval of a new transit route and a significant change in the service level. Had I thought it was that, I would have asked much more pointed questions at that time. I'm thinking that to institute another route within Fort Saskatchewan, that council should have more data, more understanding, a deeper understanding of the need and the thought process employed by administration. When I look at it, it seems to me, and please comment if I'm incorrect, but it seems to me that the route is being planned as a result of, or as a continuation of, the 2016 transit studies that were done. Were in there at that time. There were some guidelines stated, such as 400 yards from, or 400 meters from a bus stop. I'm not convinced that our transit service has ever lived up to the financial expectations outlined in that series of reports back in 2016, I think in 15 as well. And I think it's been almost a decade. I think if we're going to plan a route to the new part of town, we should have more data and a more wholesome discussion on the need, the drivers, and the forecasts, and some sort of, hopefully, discussion on minimum load occupancy to justify the routes. And I think all of that data should be forthcoming before we decide to increase, like I said, add further routes to the system. I note also that part of the explanation for the new buses, at least one of them, was to cover for downtime. It's my understanding that we've added 2 new buses to the system this calendar year. In fact, that we're running 2 new buses. I would have thought that with 2 new buses, the historical being the last 2 or 3 years, issues regarding downtime and breakdowns and that sort of stuff would be mostly over. I would think that there should be some data provided to council on what is happening with the new buses, and if in fact they're as bad as the old buses, then what are we doing about that? Is there a warranty that we could be claiming from the manufacturer, for instance? I don't know. It's all pieces that I don't understand and data that I don't have, and for that reason, I'm going to propose that this be removed from the budget for this particular year and brought back at next year after council's had some time to digest and be briefed on what we're expecting to achieve with a new transit route. Thank you.
So are you making a motion?
I was going to wait for the debate, but I can certainly make the motion now if that's what you would prefer.
We're not debating anything. Basically, with the flagged items, we're here to answer or have any final questions answered, or a motion for discussion and debate, because we're not debating anything.
Okay, I'm good with that, Mayor Catcher. Then my motion will be that Project 25010 new local transit buses be removed from this year's capital budget in anticipation of it coming back next year with a report from administration talking about the new service levels that would go along with the new buses.
Okay. And I'm assuming you've spoken in favor of your motion now?
I said just about all I think I can. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up for discussion and debate.
To your worship, through to Councillor Kelly, I drafted the following motion, or what's up on the screen, to try and reflect your intent. I'm not sure if that captures all that you wanted, but you can review that.
Thank you. That's better than what I said. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, so this motion is open for discussion and debate or questions, and I have a question first. I'll go first. And I'm going to go to Mr. Fleming. Mr. Fleming, the difference between service level and dealing with growth, regardless of what service it is, can you explain the difference between them, and how is this relevant? Adding buses to a route.
Yeah, through your worship, I don't know if it was reflected in the report or not. The gist of this one is we don't really consider this to be service level increase. I know it does add transit service to the city as a whole, but the idea here was that because of the physical expansion of the city's footprint, that this is about getting transit into different parts of the city. So for us, this is more about growth than an actual service level increase. But in the end, it has the same, no matter what language you apply to it, it has the same cost implications.
Okay, and second on that, when we talk about service level, there was no thought of increasing, so that's to bring transit into a new growth area, but a service level change would be adding like Saturdays.
Yeah, through your worship, like I would define a service level increase as adding hours, adding days, things adding destinations. Those would probably be where you change the nature of the service. In this case, it's more about sort of allowing the existing service level to have a greater reach in the community.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back on round two. Councillor Blizzard.
Can you go over some of the risks with delaying the buses? And that would include, I know we don't get the buses for 2 years, what we're anticipating, our population increase, like what are some of the risks if we take this out?
Sure. Mayor Catcher, through to the councillor. There are a number of risks that we could possibly see if we do not proceed with these purchases. The main one would be, well, first of all, the cost of the buses will likely go up the further we delay the purchase. We would be just continuing on with the inequality of service as well. All the new growth areas do not have any transit service, whereas the rest of the city does. We would be furthering the habits that people are going to start right now by purchasing vehicles, driving their own vehicles. We will not be starting the youth off at as young of an age, riding transit, getting comfortable with buses. So the further we delay this, the more people are going to purchase vehicles, the more people are going to find another alternative and then never choose transit. Costs will go up. And so, yeah, I'd say those are the main risks.
Okay. And the other question I had in here was I'm reading through and it mentions the average cost of bus rentals over the last 5 years is $32,000. Is that per year, the average cost?
Your Worship, to Councillor Blizzard, I did the calculation on Thursday, and it's over a period of 5 years. So that's the average we see. So it starts with the first year when you receive the new buses. Basically, your rental cost will be low. And as the buses are getting older, then your rental costs will go higher, right? And that's normal. That's what we see because there's more maintenance to do over years. But that's an average over 5 years.
Okay. So with our new buses this year, we've seen less rental? Because you were talking about one being out for a few months.
To date, I think we're in the $16,000 range right now for rental for the last let's say for the last 9 months. So.
Okay, thank you.
It was a little bit less, but it's going to be a little bit less than we anticipate based on the 32,000 we see normally.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you. I do not support the motion. I see this request by administration as being proactive because we do not actually receive the buses until another 2 years. So I think this is actually effective planning. Also, I do not support the motion because it's inadvertently cost savings over time because we've heard about rentals being $59,000 in 2023. And so when I do the math, if we're spending $40,000 to get 2 buses, and so one bus will cost $240, and the lifespan of that bus is 10 years, am I correct? Thereabouts. What's the life cycle?
We plan for about 7 years for one of the small buses.
Okay, well, I do see cost savings there. And obviously lower dependence on rental buses. I also do not support this motion because we've seen that the current services we're providing is delayed by 40% of the time sometimes. We want to be able to provide effective, reliable services to our residents. And I think that's important, especially for people who rely on the services. I would say that transit isn't something that would ever fully recover from or cost recover because and that's why I kind of requested for the data on how we compare with other municipalities. Like even go to countries like Europe where a huge portion of their population actually depend on transit. It's still about 50, 40, 60, 70%, depending on what country. So we can never really fully recover from our costs when it comes to transit. It is a community service. It's a social service we have to provide as a city. Excuse me. I also see this as long-term investment in our infrastructure, again, being proactive because we don't get these buses for the next 2 years. We know that our city is growing tremendously, 4.3% in the last 1 year. It's probably going to increase even further in the next few years. And so providing that infrastructure when we need it in 2027, because that's what I see here. The request is to expand local services starting in 2020, 2027. We know that our ridership has been impacted due to COVID, and we've seen that across everywhere. It's not just the city of Fort Saskatchewan, but we've also seen that the ridership is increasing. So I think that this again has been proactive. I support providing the buses. because it's going to help us reduce the city's reliance on rental buses, as well as help expand the services by 2027, not right away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harris on discussion and debate.
I too cannot vote for this this motion. I think that we're in the process of trying to build a quality of life service that provides a higher quality of life to a certain segment of our community that don't have the luxury of having cars or be able to drive to and from work or to and from school or to and from Sherwood Park, where ultimately we're commuting, for our connection to the regional system. I think we would be disenfranchising a portion of our community, which I believe will ultimately have a negative and a deleterious impact on transit in the long term. I think that ultimately, and I don't disagree with Councillor Kelly, that we need to have a service level discussion at some point in relation to how we look at our current service levels, like a potential of a Saturday service, which I think we've heard from people as something that would add value to their transit opportunities. But those are conversations we can have at a later time. I see this as a capital addition that ultimately makes sense and allows us to provide a quality of life service to our community. There are times when I see people not on the bus, which is really not any different. I was in Lethbridge on the weekend, and I saw a number of empty buses rolling around later in the day, which I think is fairly typical in transit operations across North America. But for the people that ultimately need it, if it's not there, then ultimately what are they left to do? So I can't support it in that light. I understand why Councillor Kelly brought this up, but at this point in time, I think I support administration's recommendation. You've done the due diligence. You've created the report. We have had I think, a fairly wholesome report earlier this year on transit operations, and that was satisfactory in my opinion. So I can't support it on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macon.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm not going to support the motion. I do believe that this is about maintaining service level, as has been said, equality of service the best we can. And, in my opinion, why do we have a service if it's not going to grow with the community? So for those reasons, I do support the request from administration.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, I was just going to ask for a little bit more color. One of the red flags, in the area of the new bus that we have that's down right now, and that's a little bit of a flag when we have a brand new bus. It's a significant investment. It's taken a long time to get here. So what have your discussions been with the supplier, and what kind of setup? I would assume it's under warranty. And so are we fronting costs for the rental of that bus, or are we or is that being provided to us through the contractor or the supplier? And the reason I ask this question is because it does feel a little bit like we're jumping the gun if we're ordering the same buses that we just had in one breakdown. So yeah, maybe is it a recall? Is this something that's happened with this line of bus before? And yeah, anything else?
Sure, Mayor Catcher through to the councillor. Yes, most of the costs that have been incurred due to the maintenance of the buses have been covered under warranty so far. The rental costs are not. This is something that the transit budget does pay for. But we are in constant discussions with our contractor who maintains the buses, as well as the bus vendor, to ensure that we're getting the best service we can from both. The bus vendor actually has spent a lot of their own time on site here doing the maintenance of the buses, so they are those costs are included under the warranty. So it's just the bus rental costs that we pay to our operations contractor that is not included.
Right. So we're under classified downtime for a bus, just as it would have been for a 5-year bus. So it's just no different with the new bus that we have. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And all my other questions were already answered. Thank you. So Councillor Kelly on close.
Thank you. I think the initial comments were on semantics. When you add a new route, regardless of the reason you're adding a route, it's a service level increase. We're increasing our service. it was mentioned by administration that if we don't buy it now, it's going to cost more in the future. I find that to be a misleading comment generally, because if we took that to heart, we should look out 10 years and buy everything we need for the next decade, because it will be cheaper today than it would be tomorrow. So that reason doesn't hold water for me. Inflation happens. It happens every year. It happens with our taxes as well. It happens with salaries. It costs, based on the numbers I'm seeing here, about $40,000 a year absolute capital cost to have a bus, assuming it lasts for 6 years. On top of that, of course, there's insurance and maintenance and the rest of it that goes with it. And you compare that to the rentals, and I think you would find that really owning another bus would simply be one of convenience, because I'm not convinced the economics justify it. And I've not seen any data to change my mind on that. I do think that it's a reasonable goal to have transit within 400 steps. But I don't think that goal should remove us from our obligation to run a fiscally sound organization. And I do believe that before we open a new route to meet the goal, that council should be given some data to support that new route. And I say that because the south part of Fort Saskatchewan is the newer part, obviously. We have seen data in prior years and discussion around transit that Fort Saskatchewan ranks pretty high provincially for number of cars per household. In fact, it sticks in my mind that we're over 2. And I would strongly suggest that the south part of Fort Saskatchewan would lead the provincial average. Those people have cars because they need them. And I don't think it's reasonable to assume that if we add a transit loop within town, that's going to delay or cause a family to save on the purchase of a car. Most homes in that area, other than those that are retired, most homes, in fact, every home that I'm aware of, or let me rephrase that, substantially all of the homes that I'm aware of in that area have 2 people working. They need 2 cars, and the bus isn't taking them to their job. So given that you already have the 2 cars and they're sitting in the garage warm in the winter, are you going to walk the 400 steps, or are you going to start your warm car and drive to get the loaf of bread? So it's a reasonable goal. It's a philosophical goal, I suggest, but it is a goal that is very expensive. And I do believe that before we embark on $500,000 per year for increased transit, and that's 5 million every decade, that we should have our data lined up. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying let's do it based upon economic principles. You provided a chart in response to a question showing the recoveries of municipalities. We're not Europe. We're not New York. We're not Tokyo. We're not even Edmonton. We are primarily a rural municipality. And in a rural municipality, the roads easily handle the traffic. There is no congestion, save maybe a half hour morning and afternoon on Highway 21. There is no congestion. The parking is free. There is ample parking, and I believe that's the way the residents want it. And I don't think the residents want to have a bus so they can save on the purchase of a car. I do believe that, and I've got a question. May I ask a question as part of this? Thank you. I'm trusting my memory banks here, but it sticks in my mind that the administrative procedure for transit has in it statements to the effect that 17% cost recovery is the goal. And there's also a reference to the price elasticity of transit service, and that prices will not be increased because of that. Are those items still within the administrative policy?
Your worship to Councillor Kelly, I believe the numbers that we're aiming for is 18% cost recovery.
That wasn't my question, Richard. Are those statements still within the administrative procedures?
Of the policy for fees and charges?
No. Administrative procedures for transits. I know they're there. At least I know they were there 4 or 5 years ago.
If they don't readily know, they can get back to us on that.
Get back to you on this one, but we have service standards, and we had a goal for cost recovery. I believe we reflected that as 80% in the fees and charges, and then we basically have in the fees and charges document as well that evolved from the council fees and charges that was set in 2023. We were looking at increasing our costs, our fees over time in order to achieve that. So this is what my memory comes back to, Councillor Kelly.
Okay, well, thank you, because again, council hasn't seen that that I'm aware of, and if we've seen it, I certainly missed it. I do recall the discussion around the procedure some years back, and I was a bit taken aback. So thank you. Maybe that's been changed. Ultimately, everything that the city provides by way of service, needs to be a hard discussion over what the cost recovery should be. And that goes to transit, that goes to ice arenas, and it goes to swimming pools. It goes to gymnasiums, it goes to everything. And part of the reason we have in front of us this year a very difficult budget with probably a 10 or 11% property tax increase is that we've, in common with other municipalities, and this is what concerns me when we use other municipalities as our guideline, because there's nothing saying, and I'm unaware of anything that says those other municipalities are operating prudently as well. If in fact everybody benchmarks themselves off of other municipalities, there ends up being a race to the bottom. And it's been suggested by at least one member of administration, I think, in the last couple of days, that one of the things council could look at is other sources of revenue to help offset this deficit. And I would suggest deficits going forward. And the biggest non-tax source of revenue that we have in this community is user fees. And it is what it is. Because if we're going to give away everything we do, and 17% recovery is essentially giving it away, in my humble opinion, then we're going to be faced with ever-increasing levies on our property tax, on our property owners, and property tax increases. So I suspect I understand where the vote's going to go. Those are my concerns. They still exist. And I do think that the whole concept of user fees, regardless of how sacrosanct we believe the service to be and how nice the service is to have and provide, I think we need to look at the need for the service. And I've not seen any definition or description of that need in the new communities from administration. And I'm going to leave it at that. And Madam or Mayor Catcher, call the vote, please.
Okay, thank you. The motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. Motion is defeated, 2-5. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item that we have, and so it's the question on city strategic funding for capital projects, and this was put by Councillor Kelly, Nguyen, and Abatoye. So I'm just wondering, because there's 3 people, do we just want some comments, or would you just like Mr. Fleming to speak on it? There are notes in the... Mr. Fleming, take us away on this one.
Yes, Your Worship, I'm actually, I'm still trying to pull up the document itself, but I'll go off memory and then that can perhaps kick things off. But there is essentially, from my recollection, there was essentially two sort of overriding questions that were put to us. One was, what is our strategy when we purchase the first piece of equipment? So let's say we've got 2 graders, we want to purchase a third one. How should the city go about doing that? And then the other question was around how do we deal with the replacement of that asset once it's in the fleet? So our current strategy on both those fronts is we have an annual amount that's in the operating budget right now. The amount has varied over the years, but we have an amount in the ongoing operating budget that is used to purchase equipment for the first time in most cases. And then what we do is the year after that the equipment is purchased, we start a reserve fund contribution for it. And then when it's time for that asset to be replaced, there'd be a fund in place. It's sort of a form of internal financing, I guess you could say. There are options. There are other ways we can deal with these things. You could look at debenture funding for everything. That could be difficult for smaller pieces of equipment because I don't know if we can get financing below a certain amount. That would be Ms. Andruko would have to weigh in on that. And then also we don't have to put that reserve contribution away for the replacement. We could find other ways to handle the replacement as well. But the way we do it now, I believe it's reflected in our operating budget policy or one of our policies. And we've been doing this for quite some time. So
Okay, thank
that's all
you.
I've got for now.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Kelly?
I appreciate the response provided by administration, and I stress I don't have a better plan, but I do question this one only because in part it's my job. Secondly, I don't think I completely understand it. Some of the things that we put on the capital budget, for instance, the fleet replacement, that's funded annually through property taxes, correct? And I've got a note here, for example, 25,400, which I think is the annual fleet replacement.
So for the annual fleet replacement, we do put away into the reserves to fund the replacement of it. Sorry, which one were you talking about?
It's my understanding that the road improvements, neighborhood revitalization, and the annual fleet replacement are all funded by property taxes. Am I wrong on the fleet replacement?
We only use the brand new to the fleet.
Sorry?
So if we haven't had that, so if we were replacing, so if we had 2 graders and we wanted a third one, we would use the annual capital.
What about the 2 that we already have? There's a list of fleet upgrades that we're having this year. There's about a dozen items in there. Those are all funded by reserves?
The reserves.
Are they?
Yes.
Because they're lumped in with the other stuff, and I had trouble understanding. Okay, so that answers that question.
Mr. Fleming, did you?
Well, I don't know. You just got your answer, and I'm hesitant to mess it all up now, but they're both funded by property. The replacement and the purchase are both funded by property taxes, but just from different sources. So we fund the purchase with the funding source we know as annual capital, and then we start a reserve contribution for that piece, which also comes from taxes, and that funds the reserve. So when it's time to replace that piece of equipment, we will pull that money out of a reserve and replace it. I just want to make sure we're clear about that. I mean, all the money in the reserves comes from somewhere, right? Usually it's some form of property tax or surplus or whatnot.
And as you're speaking, I'm trying to find project 25,400. I'm convinced it's the annual fleet replacement. And it's lumped in with
20. Nope, sorry.
Let's find it. so we can specifically reference.
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, it's on page 1-16 of the budget document. If that
The
helps.
original budget document, 116, thank you.
For today's agenda, it's page 31 of 91 of the PDF.
There we go. Yes, thank you. Fleet replacement, life cycle replacement. I don't see a reference in there as to the funding source. So,
through your worship to Councillor Kelly. So if you just scroll down where it starts, the paragraph that starts for 2025.
sorry, repeat.
One third paragraph in, when it starts at, it says for 2025.
Okay, yeah. $765 reserve and trade-in. Okay, thank you. I read that and obviously forgot. So once we have it, we reserve for it unilaterally as a point of principle across the board.
Yeah, and through worship, not just as a principle, but it's in our policy to do so. But yes.
Okay. And I love policy. It doesn't mean we shouldn't ever question them. So the theory behind that, for my purposes, is once we decide that we need a third 3/4 ton truck in our fleet, then the decision is, and the conclusion is, that we're always going to need that third truck, so we're going to start funding for it into the future.
I would say that's a fair statement, through your worship, yes.
The generational part of it still eludes me, but I'm going to leave it alone, Mr. Fleming, because I truly don't have a better answer either. I'm struggling with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on the speaking order. So working in public works for a number of years for now, it's true that, or the understanding, the reason the city went to this methodology was to ensure that the budget was smoothed out over the years, as opposed to having peaks and valleys for large purchases, and then that was continued on to other areas.
Yeah, through your worship, there are a few advantages to our process, and that is one of them, that there is a smoothing that can be done, so that if you have a year where there's large purchases that come around, the saving and the contribution for that has already theoretically happened. So yes, it does have a smoothing benefit.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to confirm that. Councillor Harris?
So is it fair to say that the methodology that we just talked about, that Councillor Kelly is questioning, is essentially a best practice municipal governance from a fiscal planning standpoint?
Yeah, through your worship, I think only because I mean I follow a lot of municipalities and watch a lot of budget meetings from other places just for my own, because I'm a nerd, and I don't know that I would go so far as to say it's a best practice, because there are other ways to do it, but it's definitely a practice that we're comfortable with and that we recommend. Again, it helps save your debt capacity. It allows you to self-finance. It gives you some assurance that if there are difficult budget years into the future, you might not know that they're there, that you've got funding in place for these items already. It's got a smoothing benefit to it. So yeah, it's a practice that we recommend, for sure, I would say.
When I use the term best practice, I think I can remember back many years ago having sat where you sat, dealing with municipal budget recommendations to council, that ultimately trying to find an opportunity to create that balance and not harmony, but a balance going forward, so that when you have large purchases, you know you're budgeting within the overall budgetary context, so that it is not a surprise. And so I think that's, from my experience, it's an evolutionary change that has taken place in municipal budgeting over the time that I was in municipal government. So I think it's something that makes a lot of sense, and I accept the recommendations the administration has made in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Batoye.
Thank you. So we have the financial stability reserves, where whatever surpluses we have from the previous budget year goes into. And so I assume that the reason we do that is for a deficit year, for example, to be able to balance the budgets because we cannot have a deficit budget. So in a difficult year like this, we're hearing 10%, possibly 15% property tax increase. Wouldn't it be prudent for us then? Because I look at this capital budget and I see that 7 of the 11 recommendations, outside of the regulars like the sump pump retrofit and and those things, we have 11 recommendations, requests here. 7 of the 11 are being funded by the annual capital funding. Now that has a direct impact on our property taxes. And again, I don't question the principle. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made already. But why can't we be creative this year and say, you know what, in order for us to reduce the tax burden, can we take some of these funds that we've put in reserves over the years to fund some of these things? Because I'm looking at, sorry, I can't see. I'm looking at all the things. So we have forklifts, material handling sites, new city entrance signs, parks growth plan, additional support vehicle, SUV, side-by-side ATV, utilities growth plan. Those are all being funded by the annual capital funding. Why do they all have to be funded by that? Again, I agree with putting the money aside to replace it at the end of the life cycle. But why can't we fund some of these items from the reserve? Again, to reduce, because I look at the annual capital funding, it's a 4.255 million direct from the operating budget, and there's a 1.188 operating impacts on the capital from the capital side. So that's an addition of almost 5.5 million. That in itself is. I'm sorry?
Do you want to answer your question?
Yeah, I will. This is my final comment. That's 5.5 million. That in itself is what? How much percentage? That would be like 5% increase. I'm not sure what it is, but you get what I mean. So I'm just like, can you just comment? And I don't know, I just feel like this is a time for us to be creative.
Yeah, through your worship, thank you. So the amount of money for the annual capital is not a property tax increase. I think I'd have to get Mr. Duke or Mr. Eamon to clarify, but I believe that's already built into the operating budget. So that money is there. It's not increasing taxes. It is taxes, but it's not a tax increase.
So all 5.5 is not a property tax increase. It's all.
Some of it is an increase. I'd have to get, I don't know the exact amount off the top of my head where we're increasing, say, neighborhood rehab and increasing the road rehab funding. So there are some increases in there, but the majority of it, I believe, is already built into the operating budget. So that's an annual fund that carries forward each year. If you want to try to reduce the property tax increase, my recommendation, you can do that. We can reduce the annual capital amount, but that's not my recommendation. If we're like, when we get into the operating budget discussion and we start talking about reducing the property tax number, there are some options where we can be creative and we can use a financial stabilization reserve. But our preference is to maintain the annual capital amount in the as recommended here. Because let's say you delete a project that's got annual capital funding, or you use reserves to cover it, and you reduce the amount of that annual capital fund. In future years, you're going to need to go in and you're going to want to increase it again, assuming you're still committed to the strategy of using that fund. So using, I'll give you an example, using the financial stabilization reserve to reduce property taxes, that would be a good strategy for something like the reduced revenue from the ATE, right? Because that's a one-time thing. We don't have to take that hit all in 1 year. We can take that hit over 2 or 3 years or however many we want to do. And that would be a good place to use your financial stabilization. Using it as a replacement for an ongoing fund in the budget is I would say is less ideal. So I think the conversation, I would encourage council to, like, these capital projects, whether you do or don't support them, that's a good conversation for the capital budget. And then the property tax increase is a good conversation for the operating budget in November.
Okay. I appreciate the comments you made. I think it makes sense because again, when I see annual capital fund, I'm just thinking property taxes. That's what just goes off in my head. But I appreciate you explaining that. And I will definitely agree with that recommendation of figuring out how we can use the financial stabilization reserves to buffer that impact from the ATE revenues. But other than that, I think I'm fine with the capital projects recommendations that have been brought forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harris.
This is a great conversation. I think it's really important. You've proposed some options that ultimately we can consider. If we took $2 million out of the capital budget, what would that do to reduce the proposed tax increase for 2025? Just off the top of it, because there's something that I'm leading up to.
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, so approximately $2 million in cutting the annual capital funding. Is that your question? I'd say roughly off the top of my head, 3.5%, 3.5%, 4%.
Yeah, because when I look at the capital budget, project 25-200, the neighborhood rehabilitation, we're taking $3 million out of reserves and $2 million out of annual capital funding, which comes out of the property tax. And I understand, and I'm committed to the neighborhood rehabilitation, but if we suspended it for 1 year, I don't think that's going to have a negative impact on our overall capital planning for neighborhood rehabilitation year over year. It just means in a tight year we take, in this case, $2 million, and don't use the $3 million out of reserves for that particular purpose. Now, is saving 3% a big improvement? Well, it has an impact, and I guess if we consider other conversations we have within the operating budget in terms of things that will ultimately come out of the budget, I suspect, through that discussion, then it has a positive impact. But it puts us behind the 8 ball from a neighborhood rehabilitation strategy standpoint, because then we're just pushing it down the road. I don't think that's a bad thing, but we would have to look at the magnitude of the project. We'd have to look at the negative impact that offsetting something for a period of time, even 1 year. And I respect the fact that we do, as systematically and as rigorously as possible, try to identify the areas where we need to put our capital dollars to work to ensure that the infrastructure in our community stays as current and viable as it can. So that's something that when I thought about it, after the discussion last week, that is something that ultimately could be suspended. I know administration probably wouldn't recommend it, and I only ask it as a rhetorical question in that right. So.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm just watching the time because I know our city manager has a very important 10 o'clock and I don't want him having to race up the stairs. So we'll take one more question. If you have to leave though, go ahead and leave, okay? Go ahead, Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you. Just a little question here. So you had mentioned that the actual increase from the annual capital funding, it's actually something minute. Do you have a number for what that is? By the way, I love your golden mic.
Can you restate that? Sorry, I didn't.
So you said I'd assume that the increase in annual capital funding was the 5.5 million, but you're saying there's actually no increase because that's already incorporated in the operating budget. But it's a small increase. Do you know what that increase is?
I do. So the total increase is 871,000, 350,000 for local road rehab, and 521,000 for neighborhood rehab. Okay. So in terms of percentage, what does that give us? As a quarter, 3/4? What? Probably 1% and a bit. Say that again. 1% and a little bit. Okay, 1% and a bit. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That looks like all the questions on this one. So we will move on to the next one, which is forklift. 25004. Councillor Nguyen, question, comment?
Yeah, my thoughts on this are relatively an extension of the discussion that we've just had here right now. I suppose this can be seen as a bit of a case study for the macro scale of the economics of reserve contributions, life cycle replacement with fleet. I just had a couple, maybe more general questions, and I don't know if finance is better to answer these, but so there were comments just in the notes that we got about at the end of its lifespan, there's an assessment done, as is done every year for the condition of the equipment, the need for replacement. So this, I believe, has a life cycle replacement of 10 years with the reserve contribution. So what gets done at that 10-year mark to say that, with any equipment really, to say that, yeah, we definitively need this, or we could extend this? And does that ever happen where we say, okay, we can actually go a little bit further than this, and in respective to forklift being a new piece of equipment that we haven't seen, and we haven't seen the use and life cycle of it?
Your Worship, Councillor Noyan, so on any piece of equipment, we come close to that end of life. So whether if it's a 10-year piece of equipment, we might start looking at it a little more closely at year 8. Or if it's causing us problems before then, we'll be looking at it sooner. But we'll be looking at its repair history, its downtime, its use. Is it getting the use it needs to be justify actually replacing it? An example I can give, current example or recent example, is actually the backhoe loader. We were scheduled to replace it 2 years ago. At that time, we looked at it. We said it doesn't have enough hours. Really, we haven't got the use out of it yet. It's in good shape. It hasn't causing us problems. We're still using that backhoe. We're now bringing it back in to look at for replacement next year. But again, we may extend that or we may not. It depends on what we see over the last couple of years for condition and its use. So we do look at those pieces of equipment as they come up, and we will push things out if we can, and if they're due or they're at a time where it makes sense, that's when we bring them forward for replacement.
Well, and that's good to know that doesn't happen necessarily right at the projected life cycle replacement due date, I guess, of that equipment. And then maybe can you speak to a little bit the combination of the real need for replacement and versus the buyback value, trade-in value, or anything else, and it doesn't have to be specific to a forklift or anything else. So does that, how much of a factor and what kind of combination of logic is used based on that?
Your Worship, Councillor Noyan, we try to generate a cost curve to say, taking into account that trade-in, that sale price versus buying new, and what those annual costs then are, or try and break it down actually to hourly costs, how much per hour it costs us to run that piece of equipment. That is one piece of it, but we also try and look at downtime. How often is that piece of equipment down that is needed? For example, if we have a grader that's spending 6 months of the year in a shop because we're waiting for a $3 part, it's not out there and being used. It's not a piece of equipment we can then use for whatever reason. I mean, that's an extreme example, and I don't think that's happened. But is that piece of equipment reliable? Can we get the parts we need to keep it going? Maybe it makes sense to get rid of it and get something that's more current. But it's a combination of the hourly cost to run the piece of equipment plus its reliability that we can use in the fleet. And in some cases, and I'll use forklifts and lifts in general, there's a point where we can't get them certified anymore. You have to get them annual certifications for running them because they are lifts. At a certain point, and it varies for every piece of equipment, it just becomes too old where you can't get replacement parts and they just don't become a certified piece of equipment anymore. We haven't run into that lately, but that is one of the other considerations we have to look at.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the answers. I wasn't prepared to make an motion on this. It was just more for discussion and better understanding of fleet replacement.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councillor Kelly?
Thank you. Judging from the picture provided, you're contemplating a forklift that would be primarily for yard use, outdoor use?
Your Worship, Councillor Kelly, it'd be used around the public works yard and in the buildings there, yes.
Are you contemplating an electric forklift or a gas propane type forklift?
Your Worship, Councillor Kelly, we're looking at an electric one as our first option.
Why?
Your Worship, Councillor Kelly, because it's being used within the buildings, it becomes an emissions thing. It's less emissions, better air quality. It is the way the industry is moving or has moved when you're dealing with the confined spaces rather than out throughout the neighborhoods. If we were taking this out to site, I don't think electric might be the right answer, but within our site, we're always available to bring it back and plug it in and have it charged and ready to go, where it's not it doesn't need to run 8 hours a day every day.
And we're not going to end up in a situation like Edmonton did with their fleet of electric buses, that the technology for electric forklifts is proven and industry standard, Grant, for the last number of years, so that we know that it's reliable and will last at least a decade?
Your Worship, Councillor Kelly, small electric equipment like this has been the norm for numbers of years, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That looks like all the questions on that one. So the next one, aquatics facility smoothing, will be done as part of the operating budget, so we won't go into that one. So we'll move to the support vehicle, flagged item number 5, 25026. And okay, I'm not sure who put that one forward. Okay, Councillor, pardon? I know. We'll just give him a second. All right, so, okay, I think it was Councillor Kelly that asked to have this one flagged, so go ahead, Councillor Kelly. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
I saw 2 people walk in this morning and now only you were here. What, you've been abandoned? As I understand it, you're recommending the SUV for 2 reasons. It's a better workspace, and it hauls that tool cabinet, equipment cabinet that I see in the picture in the back end. Those are primarily the two advantages for the SUV over a truck?
Red light means it's on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly, yes, those are our 2 primary reasons and ask for this support vehicle. We currently do not have a command-capable vehicle that we would like for our operational need within the department, and having that additional storage space in a mobile command center, it would be beneficial for our overall success and mitigation of hazards on scene.
Okay, so first off, what is it about an SUV that makes it a better workspace than a 3/4 ton or a 1/2 ton or a 1 ton pickup style truck? Given, and I've done a lot of reading on trucks last year because I'm thinking about my own self. Multiple of the manufacturers now offer options that make them designed for a mobile workspace. So what advantages specific to this SUV make it superior to a pickup style truck?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly. So with a pickup truck, some of the challenges we have is that some of our equipment can't freeze. So with the back of a pickup, we'd have to have a topper for some of the equipment, but we still don't have a way to not let our equipment freeze. So radios, that's why we leave our vehicles running all the time. When we're out, we don't shut them off because they have to charge up, as well as with the cold. So with this one in particular, it has the ability to have the radios and that command piece that in the picture that we provided. And then with that also gives us kind of a working space behind the vehicle. So we're not on each side of the vehicle. Gives us a little cover. For example, yesterday evening, we had our structure fire last night. And basically I was just standing in the middle of the road running the scene from the edge of a fire truck. So not having the proper equipment and the tools, the radio, the command boards, and some of the other equipment that we need readily right by us with that piece with the Tahoe, we feel that again is more of use for a duty vehicle for us. We did look at pulling rates as well. So when we did go down the road of a pickup truck versus a Tahoe, we did look at the capacity of pulling the trailers and that type of stuff. The Tahoe will be able to pull the boat, and it will be able to pull the one trailer. The other one it would not be able to pull currently.
I would think, based on what you just told me, that a suburban-sized vehicle as opposed to the Tahoe would maybe be appropriate. And I would think that it would also have better towing capacity if equipped properly. I'm going to leave this one alone. I think you've addressed my questions. I guess really what I'm coming down to now is if you're going to go this route and you seem determined, then get the right vehicle. And I would look at towing capacity, rigging it properly from the manufacturer to increase the towing capacity, and make sure you got enough room in the back to put the stuff that you think you need to have. And I'm not sure that a Tahoe would do it, but thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, and then the next, just checking all the lights, everything. Minute I look down, somebody puts their light on. Okay, the next one is the additional support vehicle side-by-side ATV. I believe that was yours as well, Councillor Kelly. Sorry.
I'm not sold on this one, gentlemen. I get it that they're extremely popular, and frankly, I still don't understand why, and I have multiple friends that own them. They will go down a narrower trail, but you still need to have a double wide trail to get them down. And within this, as I understand, and I could be, this is why you're here. You're here to tell me why I'm wrong or my imagination is wrong. But with the amount of riverbank and natural area that you have to deal with, I would understand completely the need to be portable and the need to be able to respond quickly to an emergent situation, whether it be fire or distress in a remote location inside city limits. I get that. I'm not convinced that this vehicle adds significantly to that capability. So, again, tell me why it does, please.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly. So there's many advantages of the side-by-side vehicle. So increasing our fire response in limited areas is one of the primary reasons. But an even greater reason is for overall patient care. So when somebody gets hurt in our River Valley right now, currently our members have no other access by foot and are carrying people out on spine boards. The one incident I gave this past summer, a gentleman was carried for 2 kilometers on a spine board, which is detrimental to patient care and our overall well-being and success outcome of that patient. Unfortunately, resulted in significant and severe spinal injuries, and having a vehicle that could get in there and help transport somebody more effectively and more safely and get them back to an ambulance would be at a great advantage that we currently don't have right now. Another big advantage of this vehicle is we are called upon. So with the current EMS provider in our community being Medivy, they rely on the fire department to help with patient extrication in these special, unique areas. And if we don't have the ability to help with that, then that's just going to hinder our response capabilities, and then overall causes, I guess, more potential of a detrimental outcome for the patient as well. So again, when ambulances are responding to these types of events, they cannot get to the scene either. So we need to have something that can safely transport our patient once they're packaged on the back of this wildland UTV skid. So that is another one of the primary reasons why we're asking for this, is one for fire response, but also to have enhance our response capabilities for extricating patients out of unique, diverse areas that are within our city limits.
in the example you gave of the 2-kilometer hike, as best as you can, how much shorter would that have been had you had access to a vehicle like this? Like, how many of those 2 kilometers would have been on this vehicle as opposed to still being needed to be carried?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly, for this specific example, I'd have to look at the exact routes that they went through, so I don't have the exact parameters on top of my head, so I'd have to get back to you on that. But the ability to get down these trails where an ambulance can't get to, I would say we probably would have reduced that response by at least 1.5 kilometers, at least, if not greater.
And your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly, the other piece isn't just about the patient; it's about the equipment too. EMS shows up with 2 members on an ambulance. They have 3 to 4 bags, AED. We have bags. We could have ropes. We could have the equipment too. So this 6x6 allows us to also transport the equipment that's needed to perform the type of tasks that we're doing, whether it be medical or fire.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I see this as being a single-purpose vehicle because if you put your picture showed a skid with firefighting equipment manufactured, purpose-built, and slid into and bolted down, obviously, or it wouldn't ride. Equipment as for fire purposes. But I would think that if you had that in the box attached to the unit, that it would slow you down rather remarkably to responding to emergency rescue situations. So I see it as primarily a single purpose. Is that right or wrong?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly, I think we can add on that. So in many of the departments that I've worked with a side-by-side capable vehicle, it has not slowed us down. So when we've had the Wildland skid package in, that Wildland skid package also has the ability to strap on a spine board down the side of it. Now, depending if there's winter operations or summer operations, we can either run that side-by-side with water in the apparatus, or in a winter situation where we're not outside of wildfire season, we can consider also running that without the water in it. So if we needed a situation where we needed to quickly fill that tank, we would be able to fill that off of our fire apparatus on scene as well if we needed to quickly fill that tank, or another resource, or even from a hydrant. But in terms of a response capable vehicle, it would not slow us down having that skid package on the back of it. They're actually quite effective, efficient machines.
And I have one last short question, if I may, and then I'll be done.
Okay.
So it's safer for the patient, the injured person, to be strapped onto a spinal board, strapped onto the side of a vehicle, bouncing down the trail, as opposed to being carried gently by yourself?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Kelly, actually, yes. So I know that the dynamics of that aren't ideal in any situation, but in terms of having a patient in a rugged, diverse terrain, it is the best, most efficient way to get somebody out. And again, we're not speeding down these trails. It's just simply getting them out of a very tough situation and safely loaded into an ambulance. So there will be obviously safe precautions while driving these vehicles, but they actually are quite effective in spinal motion restriction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macon?
I just had a question about safety equipment for an ATV. Like, would we be requiring, like, is there safety equipment required for our staff? Would they be required to wear helmets? What is that, if they are, is that included in this budget request?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Macon, yes. So our responders would be wearing helmets in this, as well as coveralls, or depending on the type of nature of the call. So if it was a medical assist, they would have their standard uniforms on with a helmet, gloves, eyewear, etc. If it was their medical response, they would have their wildland gear on, for example, their coveralls and helmet.
So is there any of that new equipment that's in this, or that's all stuff they currently have?
So, Your Worship, through to Councillor Macon, we currently don't have the exact UTV helmets on our department right now. We do have our standard wildland helmets and such, but we would purchase some additional helmets, not for each member, but that just specific helmets that would stay with that unit for response.
Thank you.
Okay, that looks like all the questions on that one. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so that is all the flagged items. There was 2 information requests. One was for the operating costs of the new aquatics. That's provided in the report. And the second one was information on usage of the current buses. That's also included in the report. Both of those were by Councillor Blissard. Do you have anything further, or is that satisfactory?
I think all the information was satisfactory from what was requested.
Okay, thank you. All right. That brings us to an end of our flagged items and our capital budget. So the time is 10:09. So unless there's anything else, Mr. Kaiser or Sandy or Jeremy, going.
I would just add that we're back in budget meetings November 14th, 18th, 21st, and 28th. That'll be 4 days scheduled for the operating budget presentations and deliberations.
All right. Thank you very much. So with that, then I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.